Well, as we move into the hot days of the later summer, early part of fall, the color in our garden can start to wane. There is a plant, however, that we can depend on to have some great color this time of year. That is the crepe myrtle. Now, crepe myrtles have been a favorite, especially in southern gardens, for over 200 years, but the plant is actually native to China. However, they've been used a lot and are enjoying a resurgence in popularity, partially because they are so well adapted to our area, and also because there are a lot of new varieties that have different forms and different flower colors. Now, we've used crepe myrtles quite a bit as a shrub here in Oklahoma, and if you move further south, a lot of times we see them as a tree, and I'll talk about that later. But this is just one of your kind of standard crepe myrtles that we have right here, and in general they tend to have an upright growth habit. Now, they can vary in size from a few inches all the way up to over 25 feet tall, and we usually see ours. You can see some very large crepe myrtles about 15 feet tall or more around here. Now, this one again is kind of the upright habit that we have, but there's another form that you can find crepe myrtles in, and it's right here. This is called a more weeping habit, and you can see how instead of the branches going up, they tend to want to weep over, and these tend to be a little bit shorter crepe myrtles. Now, this particular one is called a coma, and it's part of a series from the National Arboretum. And one of the nice things about this series of crepe myrtles is that it is highly resistant to powdery mildew, which can be a problem on your crepe myrtles. Now, this is a coma, and a lot of the plants in this series are named after Indian tribes. In addition to this, there's also Biloxi, Comanche, Hopi, Lipon, Muskogee, Tuskegee, Yuma, and Zuni. Now, these aren't all of them in that series. However, these are the ones that are more cold hardy. And so, since we're on the northern end of the crepe myrtle zone, most of them are hardy to zone 7. Some can be grown in zone 6, but they might be more of a perennial than a tree or shrub in zone 6. The cold hardiness is also important. Now, you want to plant crepe myrtles in an open area, and to get the best growth and the best flowering, you want to have at least 6 to 8 hours of sun a day. And they'll take that late afternoon sun. They love it. So if you're looking for something to put on the west side of your house, you might think about putting a crepe myrtle there. They're also not very fussy about the type of soil that they have. They are drought resistant, and they're also not real fussy about fertility or pH. However, you wouldn't want to plant them in a spot that stays wet all the time because they don't really like to have wet feet. Now, something that I was telling you about, the form of crepe myrtles, if you're shopping for a crepe myrtle, you're going to want to match the size of the crepe myrtle to the spot that you have, because if you have a very large growing crepe myrtle and you've got a very small spot, you'll have to be cutting it back all the time. Now, they can come anywhere from miniature, also dwarf, semi-dwarf, medium, and tall. Now, don't let the name dwarf fool you, because dwarf crepe myrtles can grow up to 10 feet tall. So be sure to check your particular crepe myrtle for how large it's going to get before you take it home and plant it. Now, they come in colors such as pink, white, also shades of purple, and there are also some variegated flowers, and we're going to show you one right now. Now, this flower is really pretty with that variegated foliage, and you can see why it's got the name prairie lace, because when you look at it, you can see it's got these beautiful frilly little edge of white lace around a pink flower. Now, the crepe myrtles have been doing very well for us for several weeks now, and you can actually extend the bloom period and get another flush of bloom by deadheading them. And basically what you want to do is, as the flowers start to fade, you just come back down below the flower head and cut those off. And by doing this, we'll get another flush of bloom, because they'll come back out and bloom again before frost. Now, not only are crepe myrtles good for the flowers, but they also have some very good fall color. Now, if it freezes too early before we have a lot of cool nights and our days get really short, we won't have that fall color. But if we've got a nice long fall, crepe myrtles can add a lot to your fall color scheme. Now, the crepe myrtles that we've been looking at have actually been trained in more of the shrub form, which is what you see a lot here in Oklahoma. However, you can start to train them in a tree form, and we're going to go see some that have been done that way. Well, the crepe myrtles that we've looked at so far were trained more in a shrub form, which is pretty common in Oklahoma, especially in the northern part of the state. Now, as you get further south, you can see a few more trained in tree form, and that's what we've got right here. Now, this is just out in front of the Student Center on the campus of OSU, and basically what they've done is limbed this crepe myrtle up from the base and let it grow at the top. Now, to do this, you would prune it just a little bit differently, and instead of just chopping it back, fairly close to the ground in the spring when we would usually do this, you actually just cut off the tips. So as far up as you can go, cut that off and then let that branch out. Now, as we follow this up here, you can see where this has been done right here on this branch. It's been cut off and then allowed to grow on out. And then it's been cut off again right out here. I don't know if you can see this, but right there, and then allowed to branch out here. Now, while we can't get trees as large as you would, say, down in Louisiana, you can get some nice bark, and this is what you're wanting to see when you do limb a crepe myrtle up like this. You can see this bark is so smooth, it actually feels like it's been polished here. And then we have this contrast between the gray and the tan on the bark, which is very, very pretty when you have older crepe myrtles. Now, the other thing that we would do when we were pruning, instead of letting all of the branches come up out of the ground, you just select a few and clean the rest out. Now, this is done in the springtime, but you'll notice that right here you can have a lot of suckers come up around the base. Those we can prune out even during the growing season. We could prune these out, and also you may have a few suckers along the stem that you can prune out as well. We've got a few that came out here. We could go ahead and clip those off. Now, our major cleaning that we would do, of course, would be in the spring. So if you want to try growing your crepe myrtle in a more tree-like form, choose one of the taller crepe myrtles. Also choose one that's cold hardy so that it won't freeze back down to the ground. And don't be disappointed if ever so often it does freeze back down to the ground. That's part of growing crepe myrtles in Oklahoma. They hardly ever freeze out completely, but ever so often you have to start this process over again.
We hope you've enjoyed this classic from the Oklahoma Gardening Vault. Remember, even though these tips and techniques are timeless, there's always something new to learn in the world of gardening. By subscribing to both Oklahoma Gardening and OK Gardening Classics, you'll have access to a wealth of gardening knowledge, both classic and contemporary.